and to say that you should have the expectation.
But the problem is, and this comes back to GCHQ and the whole fiasco over the snooping of data. The problem is this: there's many people that are vocal, there's many campaigns. I can say, and we can all say this: nothing will ever change. The people that are the ones that are wanting to intrude on this data are not people that would be put off, stopped, prevented by law. The GCHQ example was great because, from what I understand of the whole case, and I've followed quite a few writers that I trust very much on this subject about the whole snooping of data. Now, we've got privacy laws in the UK, pretty much as the Americans and any other country have their own privacy laws, and I don't profess to know them. However, what our intelligence services can do, and we've seen this already, is that they can snoop by proxy. So, for example, the American Secret Service or whoever snoops can snoop on British data and then pass the information back to the British without breaking.
But this is old stuff. This is echelon. But I want to jump in just a few more points. So one point I wanted to make as you were making it, you mentioned how much bandwidth is cheap for you in storage, but storage is not expensive, and bandwidth you're paying for it because the US currently, while we still have net neutrality, as far as I know, we do have it in Europe, and it seems like there is going to be legislation protecting it. You're paying for the data when you're using Wi-Fi or your home broadband, so that's just the model of how things are. So they're not really doing you a favor in that sense. The other thing is GCHQ, since you mentioned it, and by the way, they don't just snoop on data, they snoop on streams. So they would even hook onto people's Yahoo chats, and as far as we know, is they watch like 100,000 people masturbating. That's what they found, and this is not really acceptable because when they snoop on 1.9 million people, then you know they're not really spying on people who are very likely to be. So exactly. So you said things have always been the same and nothing has changed, but it's actually not true. Things have changed because in the past they couldn't do all this stuff. When the Pentagon, this thing called the Inter-Net came out from the Pentagon, it wasn't yet possible to do everything like that. There was no infrastructure, there was no backdoor. Instead of backdoor, it seems to be the new thing now to implant vulnerabilities in some software. We don't know enough yet, but I've done some investigation and it's still being discussed on the web. But it seems
the thing is, sorry to interrupt, but the thing is, and I've made this point in a few of my articles of late. We can't. There's no dispute that snooping into people's private conversations and habits or whatever is completely out of order. There's no dispute there whatsoever, and I think the millions of people who were intruded upon can feel rightfully aggrieved for that intrusion of their privacy. However, this is something that throughout history, and I've documented this before, has been done. Now, in the times of the Romans, because we didn't have the technology.
So in Kenya, when the Brits did it in Kenya, they did destroy some evidence of it. Recently, I think they throw some evidence in near Singapore in the waters. They were very much limited in what they could do. This is the reason. This is the reason you have a nation now called the United States of America, because they were able to organize against the British.
I'm talking about the ethos of invading privacy. Now, technology has enabled people to do that simpler, and 1.9 million or however many people can be intruded on now. It's a click of a button, I assume, and a lot of data collected.
Not everyone. Not everyone. Here's the thing. So people can still use encryption, even though RSA and several other things are very much weakened by design. They were designed later or perturbed to be vulnerable and give the illusion of security, which is even worse than having no security at all, because you can say things that you wouldn't say otherwise if you thought that you were being eavesdropped on. But here's the thing: if you're when it comes to GCHQ, what you have to bear in mind, they have a very nice model of we'll have CCTV everywhere. There is a robbery, there is a murder, we'll look back at the footage. Now, the footage, of course, is not going to prevent the crime. It might help catch the person, but yesterday when I was walking past the store and I watched one of those guys in a, well-armored vehicle going to pick up some cash from one of the pubs, I was thinking of like a potential threat, because usually you would try to think why they do certain things at the airport and what they're trying to prevent and how they would prevent an actual case and an actual threat. And then you actually think to yourself of the CCTV and the fact that these days as far as I know, from personal experience for people that I was a victim of and people nearby, people just, they just wear some kind of a hoodie or something to hide their face. So the CCTV will keep on doing surveillance on people who are not doing anything wrong. And as soon as the bad guy happens, for instance, the person who stole my bike last year, he's gonna wear a hoodie, and then let's say some guy stole your bike, and except his skin color, they cannot see anything. They could just see a guy with a hoodie taking my bike and walking away, and they can see it on CCTV, but it's not very useful. So the model that says, okay, we'll just catch those people and photograph their face is really breaking down, because those who plan to do bad things will still use, reliable measures of avoiding those things. So who do you actually spy on?
Yeah, I mean the problem is, and I mean CCTV is probably a topic that goes way off course of what we're discussing. But I mean, in brief, CCTV is always one of those things that does it prevent crime. Well, we can't ever measure that, because you can never measure what has been prevented because it hasn't happened.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, look, you're right. People can disguise and wear hoodies or whatever when they commit a crime and render CCTV completely useless. That's not the only method of capture that CCTV would use, because of course it can be used to track an individual's whereabouts, and that's for good reasons and bad reasons. If they were following the guy with the hoodie who'd concealed his identity and we managed to see him go into a car, for example, and a number plate was shown, then that might lead. But again, it can also be used for the purposes which we've seen in reports where you've had bogus CCTV operators that have used it to infringe on people's privacy and use them completely inappropriately. Could I just add, though, it might interest you to know, in some of the bigger stores where they have CCTV on the outside, there's a lot of rules. I mean, I would assume this is the same in sort of any person who's got access to a CCTV camera, but even more so in the bigger sort of industries. There's very strict rules which people have to abide by in terms of privacy. For sort of zooming the camera in, you can't focus it on people's houses or anything like that. And because everything is recorded, there's a very good supervisory method going on if it is being supervised. I've got mixed feelings about CCTV, and I think what it does do, what we can say is it does up the ante. If somebody, for example, your Securicorp or security money collector, if somebody was to commit a crime involving a robbery of him, the ante would be considerably higher, because now they've got a lot of prevention. They've got the locked van, they've got the security guard, they've got the box, they've got all that sort of thing. So they're going to have to go to more extreme measures in order to commit the crime. Now, that could well stop the average Joe criminal who might think, oh, I'll try and snatch that briefcase off that chap, and only attract the more hardened, determined criminal who's willing to go the extra mile, as it were, to commit the crime. That's arguably, but we can't really say, because we can't say what CCTV is.
It's important, so you're talking about deterrence as the issue, and I agree with you that I always said that one thing that CCTV might be able to achieve is deterrence, and it's really hard to measure that. So you might say people will be aware that the CCTV will act as a deterrence. However, it depends on deterrence against who. So a lot of people who would be on drugs, and I'm not trying to generalize here, but a lot of people who commit crimes, they have strong physical urge to, they have to do it. I don't think a camera is going to prevent them from pulling a knife and trying to mug someone. And the other thing is, you have to distinguish between, like classical crime or minor crimes and shoplifting and things like that, from the issue of supposed terrorism. I didn't like how the press in the UK still plays around and really squeezes this cow that's the last year's I call it a homicide. However, they insist that this is a terrorism act. The guy slaughtered the guy, disgusting what happened there. However, to try to justify whatever it is they do, they will use this, basically a failure of the system to prevent a crime, to persuade us that we have this issue that's terrorism, and therefore we have to do surveillance of just about any British person and look at all the emails.
It's a very grey area. I mean, because what constitutes terrorism? For example, if there'd been a case which was tragically the same, where it was, say, two football supporters from an opposing team had done the same thing, would that still be an act of? Because terror is such an ambiguous title. It's something that isn't particularly well described by anybody in authority, and it's something that leaves the public sort of scratching their head until they hear the word mentioned.
It's a very actually, we had this discussion today in the TechBytes IRC channel because somebody brought up the fact that insurgent is a very insignificant, nebulous term.